Good afternoon and welcome to our panel on practicing changemaking. Once again, my name is Alan Yu and I'm with the Lian Center for Social Innovation, Singapore Management University. Okay, and so we're talking about practicing changemaking. And although we recognize the importance of empathy, collective teamwork, and new leadership in the practice of changemaking, we're going to focus solely onto the practice of change making itself. And as we've learned from Christie's presentation, change making involves something called combinatorial innovation, if you will recall. And it's about bringing different ideas together. We can't build an airplane if we don't have an understanding about how engines work, about how birds fly. New solutions are the result of old ideas. But consider for a moment that we are all creative. We all have something that contributes to a solution. In other words, it's not just about what I know as a person, it's about what we know as a group, as a system. It's about the creativity of the group. Good leaders do not just combine the things that they know, but they also are willing to work with the understanding and the expertise of others. So the purpose of this panel is really to get into the question of how do we learn and create solutions for change together. Before I proceed, I want to encourage you all to drop your questions into the chat. We will address them at a later time. So without further ado, let's introduce our panel. I want to first introduce Wayne Chia of Sentient. How many of you enjoy technology, computer programming, designing websites, making apps that solve problems, video games? If that is something that you're interested, why don't you show us your interest by giving us a thumbs up? Or you can use the reaction button, or that works too. Great, 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 great. So I want to say that you can use technology to make the world a better place. And Wayne is somebody who does exactly that. Wayne is a social entrepreneur. He looks for financial opportunities that improve our world using technology. And he uses technology to solve many problems. He uses technology to bring people together, to create communities, and to educate people. Wayne, I would like to offer you some time to talk about how you see the practice of change making with technology.
Okay, thank you so much, Alan. Didn't know that I was the first to go, but happy to see everyone here. It's very interesting because I also run a separate program where I work with social entrepreneurs, and I also call them change makers. So how do we use technology to do change making? Well, I'm sure by now most of you guys here are in a very different position from when I was a student, right? During my time, I don't see that many students in your resume say that I've done some form of data analytics or Python. I was shocked these days that the kind of internship, the applicants that I receive, whether you are in culinary school or you're in law, you might have done something like that, which is a surprise to me, right? But it actually excites us because technology is an enabler. And when we are talking about change making, all we are talking about is that how do we lower the barrier of access? How do we make things easier, right? So it's not so much about how far you can go. That's what a lot of people are doing these days. But at least from my side, I'm trying to lower the barrier of entry. So on a day job, I'm the product director of Sentient.io. We actually package AI models as consumable microservices via an API call. Now, I know it may sound a bit like a mumbo jumbo, but today you guys are able to do things like transcribing an entire voice into text, text back to voice within a blurb of text. You can identify all the names, you can identify all the locations, just like that, within seconds, or actually milliseconds. We are making that accessible. Now, what you can do with that is up to you guys, right? So what we are doing is we're really lowering the barrier of access. So I just want to share with you guys a bit of a perspective on change making, and I'll end here. When it comes to collective change making, I feel there are two things that need to happen. One is that you need to recognize that you cannot solve all problems yourself. And if you want to think big enough, you will soon find that there are some problems that you or your small little team will never be able to achieve it. So you need to identify very early on who do you need to partner with. Elon Musk is a bit of a personal hero, but if you actually look at everything that he does, as a private sector company, he cannot do it alone. He actually partners very closely with the government, whether it's launching a rocket to space. Come on, think about it, right? You launch a rocket to space, how much government clearance do you actually need, right? An example of that, launching electric cars, you definitely need some form of multi-sector partnerships to get that clear. And I think also the second piece of perspective or offer is the humility to know that sometimes your role is to be the hero to make it happen. Sometimes your role is not, is to enable. So I think in two of my jobs that I'm doing today, I'm actually playing more of the role of the enabler. We make AI capabilities easy so that people like change makers like you can do something amazing with it. That's one part. And on the other part, I'm also enabling a lot of social entrepreneurs to improve on their business, to scale up their business and their impact, to create more sustainable impact in the community members and their beneficiaries. I will stop here. Back to you, Alan.
All right, thank you very much. I do think of change making as sort of like a treasure map where the different pieces are ripped apart and each of us is a piece. Each piece alone is not enough, but when you put the pieces of the map together, you have a path to a brighter and more prosperous future. So thank you very much for sharing that. So thank you, Wayne. We're now going to talk about something that human beings have been doing for a very long time. Give me a thumbs up if you ever wanted to grow your own fruits and veggies. So Bjorn Loh is a practicing urban farmer and social change maker. He is the co-founder of Edible Garden City. And this is an urban urban farming social enterprise. So Singapore might not have a lot of land, but it has a lot of buildings. And can you imagine how much food we could produce if we were able to grow food on top and within each building? There is the potential to grow anywhere and everywhere in Singapore, on buildings and our communities, our community void decks even. And we're talking about healthy food without chemical fertilizers and using technology to get water to the top of buildings that are cost effective and bringing that restorative power of nature back to the city. Bjorn, please tell us a little bit about your practice of change making.
Hi everyone, good to see everyone here. Hi Harsh. Yeah, it's been a crazy journey for 9 years, and I guess at the very start we were trying to address a sort of food security challenge that Singapore has faced or is facing, but that has pivoted in many sense over time, where we actually see that the social ecology of Singapore needs to evolve into one that is more responsible to the environment, and also to use an urban agriculture as a modality or a tool to instill a level of environmental ethics within its citizens. And we see that participation from citizens as an important point of changing a whole society effort to food growing. And we have not done it alone. Of course, this has been a very collective effort. Although we were quite alone at the very start, but we were engaging with multiple groups across the board, whether it's from developers to chefs, down to other civic movement groups wanting to address food challenges within our society, and then now bridging into practices or indigenous practices around the region to really sort of tease out native food narratives that can be adapted to urban food growing solutions, because in one end you see a pivot, you see a trend that is growing into these high tech vertical urban farms which are in no sense wrong, but it is also you need a diversity of different approaches to a problem. And with this collective sort of effort with government, interest groups and society, we're actually trying to build this collective actualization for the food system, where everyone can be part of that solution rather than waiting for the government to then make it viable for us. We all have to participate in that to actually create a better food system for everyone. So this is a little bit about collective change making from my end.
Thank you. So it's very interesting. I see this very interesting paradox about social innovation. Sometimes we have to change so that we can be more of who we already are. And we are communal creatures. We are part of nature. And sometimes we need to adapt so that we can be more of who we really are. So thank you very much for sharing that. Next, how many of you are interested in building and designing cities? Maybe you wanted to design a really cool park like Gardens by the Bay, or maybe you wanted to create spaces where people can have fun and do things like skateboard, make music, do yoga, meditate. If you feel that you're an urban planner, give me a thumbs up. Yeah. So I want to introduce you to Anupam Yog. So Anupam is a pragmatic urbanist, social entrepreneur, and creative strategist, as well as a researcher who's interested in making places more conducive to well-being, individual mental health. Anupam, talk about what practicing change making means to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And really excited to be here. I think change making to me, collective change making to me means quite, I guess it's somewhat obvious in the phrase itself that it has to be a cooperative collective exercise. And I think my insight around change making has emerged over time. And I've always wondered why we compete when we're ultimately trying to cooperate. Most of our change has happened because of cooperation across human beings over centuries, right? Most of what we're doing today is on the shoulders of giants who came before us. And when we're thinking about cities are the ultimate invention of humankind. This is a cooperative outcome. Yet somehow over the last few decades and perhaps even centuries, we have forgotten, I think, this basic idea of cooperation, and cities have somehow, many cities have started to foster ill health as opposed to our well-being, generators of stress as opposed to fostering well-being. And to me, the key is really with our mental health, because the mind is a very powerful tool. And I think if our cities and collectives can really enable us to manage and harness our potential, which is ultimately our mind, I think to me that is the key for change. And given that we are urban creatures, my practice of change making has really been in the urban context. Last year, post the lockdown, the circuit breaker, I shared an idea with my community of mindfulness practitioners that we thought it would be nice to get the community together in a social way to practice together. After all, it's not so odd to be sitting outside and taking a moment of rest or quiet. And so we started something called the Big Sit. And we didn't know if people would show up, but surprisingly, we had a number of people show up in Singapore's CBD in Guoco Tower. And that was a real example of collective change making. So to me, I think change making really is something that begins ultimately within, by sitting quietly and observing yourself. And that gives you, I think, enormous insight that allows you to cooperate with others by actually cooperating first with yourself and managing your restlessness. So to me, that's really the key to change making.
Yeah. I agree with you. And sometimes, like when I think about it, if I just see myself as myself, I feel very limited. But if I can see myself as my community or as my society or as my country, all of a sudden I feel so much more powerful. All of a sudden things just feel so much more possible. So thank you very much for sharing that. So I want to say thank you very much for all of you for taking the time to share about your work. We're definitely very humbled and inspired. I'm now going to proceed to ask each of you questions about your change-making process. And this is where it gets interesting. So panelists, I'm going to ask one of you a question about your own experience that will help us to understand how practicing change-making works at a much more in-depth level. If the question is not directed to you, that doesn't mean you can't contribute. Please feel free to jump right in if it in any way makes our conversation richer. So in our previous session, Christy talked about combinatorial innovation, bringing together different things to create something new. So Wayne, you're a bit of a Renaissance man. You've invested a lot of your time into learning technology, finance, collaboration, leadership, social innovation. But let's not just assume that you're the only creative person out there with all the know-how on how to put it together. My question for you is, how do you allow yourself to learn from others? How do you allow yourself to, to help you to shape the creative process? How do you allow others to help you, to shape the creative process of combinatorial innovation?
That's quite a few questions rolled into one, actually. So how do you allow others to shape the creative process? Is that what I'm hearing as part of the combinatorial innovation process?
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, there must be genuine curiosity. There must be a genuine desire to be a knowledge omnivore. Okay, I know this is a bit of a big word. Interestingly, I had some research. In fact, I have it right in front of me. This is probably going to interest you guys. It seems like Nobel laureates, scientists who are Nobel laureates, have an unfair advantage if they venture outside of their domain. Okay, so compared to an average scientist, Nobel laureate scientists are, here it is, 2 times more likely to play a musical instrument, 5 times more likely to engage in crafts, 8 times more likely to write in visual arts, 10 times more likely to write poetry, 20 times more likely to engage in performing arts. Okay, what does that tell you, right? When you actually look beyond your domain of knowledge, sometimes new ideas are introduced. Let us sink in for a bit. Think about some of the best products that you have seen. I mean, Steve Jobs was great at this, right? He took inspiration for product design on something that otherwise is pretty boring. I mean, computers, not your time now for most of the attendees here. During my time when I grew up, computers are nothing more than a beach box, right? And then someone comes in and challenges the norm to say that, why does it have to look like that? So Apple products get their inspiration from appliances, from cars, from all sorts of things that you have never thought about. They introduce new materials, new surfaces, change the way you touch and feel a computer. That's combinatorial innovation, right? There's different names depending on which domain you call this. Some people call it cross-domain thinking. In the AI world that I come from, they call it transfer learning. Doesn't really matter. The whole idea is that you can take the best from one domain and apply it in a very interesting way into another domain. So that's something that you can only do if you have a broad enough knowledge into a few things.
Okay. All right. And then I also want to point out that it's not just about your own ability to be combinatorially innovative, but it's also about other people to be combinatorially innovative as well. However, if you have a great invention, if you have a really great vision that you think will change the world, and then the people who would help you, must be able to see it. They must be able to understand it in a way that is somewhat similar to you. But most likely, they've not thought about placemaking or designing cities to allow for mindfulness and well-being. So my question to you, Anupam, is how do you get others to visualize and consider new possibilities? How do you get people to explore with you?
It's a great question. So placemaking is as its name suggests making a place, but it's a bit more than the literal interpretation. It's making places friendly, making them conducive for our well-being, happiness, health. And it also implies that you're doing it as a community. It's typically implied for public spaces. So it necessarily requires communication, conversation, and active listening, in fact, would perhaps be the most important. Um, After all, our cities are not perfect. That's pretty obvious. So I think it's not very hard to get people to agree on the fact that, okay, something's not right. But that's not necessarily practicing change making. That's practicing complaining, that, oh, this is not right, or that's not right. So I think it is harder to get people to shift and say, this is not about practicing positivity and saying, let's look at the positive. It's kind of in the middle. Can we be objective and look at what the possibilities are? And you're absolutely right. Visioning things is very hard because we all vision things differently. I think the key is really focusing on the idea that all change, at least in the context of practicing mindfulness in public spaces, is really that you can feel a very tangible benefit when you're practicing mindfulness directly, through your direct experience. It's not an intellectual thing. And I find that people generally are pretty curious about the idea that if you sat still and quietly with your eyes closed, it can have a very powerful positive impact on you. It's almost counterintuitive. So really, for me, it has been partly listening, really getting people to share with me, what their challenges are. I think people love to share, and I think inspiring people to share is very important. I think that allows the creation of a bond or a feeling of mutuality, which can lead to very magical things. I think the simple act of listening properly can lead to a lot of things, a lot of interesting things. So to me, I think at the heart of all change making is active, careful, intentional listening. And the word intentional is very important, because we can be very distracted in our mind. I could be talking, but completely on another planet. And I think that's what cultivating attention and intention allows you to do. So to me, that's the key.
Okay, so yeah, so an important point here is, although this is a panel that is focused on creative change making, active listening, empathy, other skills do come into play as well. Before we can, another point that I would like to make about creative change making, before we can even do together, and as Christy had pointed out, we must first learn together. And one of those things may be how to farm, because we grew up in the city, right? We're disconnected from nature. Not only that, how to implement something, radical like vertical farming. How do you do it in a way that is closed loop and zero waste? So Bjorn, first of all, please explain to us what vertical farming and closed loop systems are, and then talk about how you and your community learn together.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think I have quite a bit to talk about vertical farming with as a concept or as a application. There's always the approach of intensifying agriculture practices within the city because of the limitation of land. And the sake of going vertical for the sake of going vertical, which we have seen in recent examples, it may not be the best solution forward, because it can be quite costly infrastructurally to set up these systems. Yet we're not looking outside of the box, where there are actually quite a bit of underutilized green spaces within the city that can be turned into a little bit more ecologically approach farms, whether they are on rooftop gardens that used to grow ornamental plants and converting that into food production spaces. And these are really low-hanging fruits. But what I found with being able to, at least nurture that collective change making, thought process is really providing that space and that platform. We've done a series of pop-ups, again, very tuned to placemaking, whether it's at the top of People's Park complex in the past, where we activated a 30,000 square feet rooftop space, rooftop car park space. And once we were able to create that space, right, with a simple idea, right, we were not very creative in how we approach it. We created the space. The ideas started to come in. People that were interested in the food systems, they will come, and they will then put in their energy and their ideas into curating that space together. And it's this collective sort of energy that actually creates a narrative that's really powerful. Again, is a collective actualization of the whole society approach to food growing. The other pop-up that we did was in Little India, in 2 shop houses, and that was a challenging space as well, because there was not enough light to grow food. There was a very small sort of patio rooftop, and we brought indoor farming into the space, not because we are proponents of industrialized farming, but because of the situation. But we adapted it in a very simple way of working with hardware stores around the Little India region to buy fluorescent lights and started growing. But what this then created was a space, was a common platform for people interested in the food system to come together, and from that, new ideas starts to come up, and new civic movements starts to appear. Movements like Foodscape Collective and Tana, and mushroom growing all came out from that space. So again, it's again not a lot of things is not what we have done, but what we have provided for that collective change making to happen.
Okay, it's a very interesting point, because I think the idea of space, and it doesn't have to be a big one, but a space for learning, a space for understanding. It's like when you bring people there, and then they see it, and then they understand, and then they're able to build on your own thinking. So I think that's a very interesting point to make. The important that we need spaces for people to learn, spaces to build communities. Another point that I would like to make is that solutions do not exist within a vacuum. There is context. So the context is going to be many things. It's the political structure, it's the culture, the way things are done here. It's the technology. It's the size of the social sector. It's the players, and those could be your allies or they could be your competitors. It's also the physical space, the land. So within the system, there are opportunities that will help you, and there are obstacles that will hinder you. So my question to each of you would be, how do you examine and understand obstacles and opportunities? And how do you create a solution with these things in mind?
I can go. I think part of it is changing your perception. If you perceive something as an obstacle, then of course it will be that. So I think there's a great teacher, his name is Eckhart Tolle. He talks about 3 modalities of awakened doing. And the 3 modalities are acceptance, which is a very important modality, enthusiasm, and enjoyment. And he says you shouldn't do anything unless you are practicing at least 2 of these 3 modalities. And you can apply this to anything, whether you have an exam which you perceive as an obstacle. But I think somehow we function better if we practice acceptance, and we can get ourselves to, even if we can't get ourselves to be enthusiastic about it, maybe enjoy it. So to me, I think that really helps, because as soon as you accept something, somehow it just dissolves away, and stuff happens. So you've got to trust yourself.
Very interesting. I never thought about it that way. I never thought about accepting obstacles. That's a very My mind is blown. I'm just wondering if Bjorn and Wayne have anything that they would like to add regarding how do you work with the system and understanding the obstacles or the opportunities that the system presents in your solutioning, in your design, in your problem solving.
Of course, we have faced multiple obstacles throughout the last 9 to 10 years. But every obstacle presents an opportunity. So again, it's like what Anupam shared, is how you perceive that obstacle. And sometimes a lot of the solutions or ideas that we're working on, sometimes the time is just not right, for certain things to come to fruition, and so we park it, we work on it, we park it, and when the opportunity or the levers are there within how society or how the ecology is moving, then we plug it in, and we are able to activate that. So anything that you work on today, whether you can fit it in at that point of time, it's not lost. The idea is still there. Just be patient, and the time when it changes, it can be plugged in. So I see most obstacles as possible opportunities, and building on that. So always having that positive outlook. It's easier said than done, of course, right? Of course, I've tear my hair out most times, but I think over time you start to realize that the entire system is quite impermanent, right? There's no permanence in certain setting. Things change, and when you are able to understand that, you'll be able much better to deal with that.
Okay. Yeah, so something I might want to add. Yeah, we're talking about windows of opportunity, and I remember for a long time, we really couldn't have conversations about the environment because it was seen as kind of in opposition to certain conventional sources of energy, and there was a lot of opposition to it. But nowadays the window is wide open. So looking for windows of opportunity. I'm just wondering if you see any windows of opportunity at this time, Bjorn.
Yeah, there's plenty that we see. Of course, we've kind of worked on the space for quite a long time, and obviously the shift in how the nation's approaching to sort of food security and food sustainability is a great opportunity, right? That we have been part of that journey, but we decided not to partake in that opportunity because I think as one sort of core fundamentals for me is that as a change maker, once I'm able to normalize one approach, like addressing underutilized space, and if that is picked up by the mainstream, it's time to move on to the next thing, because you always want to push the boundary and agendas, right? So we start to see the opportunity on how can we entrench urban farms into broader urban planning for the future through healthcare systems. And this is a big pivot, and that's the opportunity that we identify. It's going to take a long time, but it is always not kind of harping on the old stuff, and kind of looking forward and moving forward with new ideas on how you can change the entire, because the food system is very complex, right? And we're working on a very small part. There's so many problems to solve. And so we are always finding that next narrative for urban farms.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, and we now have time to take questions from the audience. And do we have any? If you have any questions, if you could leave them in the chat, or if you are brave enough and would like to take the mic, please go right ahead. But who has questions for our change makers at this time?
I have a question for Anupam. No, I've been reading about the Consciousness Cities Index, so I really want to find out a lot more about that, and how is that possibly going to change the way we design cities, for the future.
Thank you so much. Actually, the Conscious Cities Index idea is really born out of some inspiration by, the inspiration that I had from people like yourself, actually, Bjorn. So, I think the idea was, to me, when I looked at our cities, I really felt, look, there is a lot going on to make spaces intentional in certain pockets of the city. And I'm sure that's having a positive impact on people's health and well-being. But I just felt that we're not able to measure it in those clear terms. And so the hypothesis is really just looking at this connection between our public spaces and their intentionality. Are they purpose fit to support intentional practices? So meditation is just one intentional practice, but there could be so many. Cycling, running are also informal meditation. Equally, any sort of hobbies, anything that requires us to be in the present moment. It could be playing a sport. It could be drawing, putting together a piece of art or playing music. So to me, it's quite a wide range of things that fall under the purview of intentionality, intentional activity. And in my mind, that generates a certain well-being. It fosters a feeling of well-being. That being said, cities are ultimately communal places. So I really wanted to study the intersection, the public spaces, the community spaces. Are they intentional or not? We couldn't be doing the big sit were it not for this beautiful venue in Guokotawa, in the heart of CBD. Our original plan was to be in a garden somewhere, Gardens by the Bay, etc. But then we realized we won't really be able to do this. It'll be very logistically challenging. And so immediately we realized that, there is a gap, even in our best parks and gardens, we do have a challenge of not, there is a level of intentionality that we can perhaps achieve, which is not there yet. So I think the cities of the future would certainly be the successful cities of the future will be ones that are fostering our health, are fostering our well-being, our mental health, our social health, where you can almost reimagine the city as a collection of nudges that are reminding you when you're running out of, in normal times, you're going to catch a train or catch a, commuting. Could you be using those opportunities as moments of rest and not necessarily rushing through your day or captivated by your phone or some such? So could we be encouraging and almost creating that inspiration in everyday life for being restful and intentional?
It's very beautiful. I see a question coming from Purvi.
So hi, this question is to Bjorn, and I would just like to ask you, I mean, like, you're definitely doing something really good about this farming, but what kind of pattern do you see amongst the youth? Like, are they supportive? Are they coming forward to help? Because ultimately it's them who's going to be taking it forward. And what kind of awareness are you building in them? I mean, the kind of impact or their response to what you're doing. What is it like?
Thanks for the question. Youth and adolescents kind of quite a big part of our focus. We have built programs in the past for schools, trying to kind of fit, curriculum around science through using food growing as a lever, as a tool to bring across some of these science messages in school. I think if we are able to sort of entrench this into sort of national curriculum in all schools, we can start to see some form of environmental responsibility forming in that space from an early age. This is all the way down from kids, that are in sort of a nursery, childcare, all the way up to university. But I think what is really heartening is that we have 40 staff now, and the average age is 29. So a lot of young change makers coming into the space, wanting to drive the future food movement. So that is a big interest in this space. This is not solely our doing. It is part of a broader global movement, whether it's tapering down from the chefing industry of local food and all of that, and the media really portraying it in a romantic notion of farm to table and local food, but more really we see that that sort of framework for environmental responsibility really forming through food. Like I give you an example. We did a program for a poly where they came on the farm and then did some work, and they realized that actually it is hard work, growing your own food or growing food in general. Agriculture, it's a lot of toiling under the sun, and suddenly there was a vegetable that dropped on the ground through harvest, and one of the students just picked it up and it's like, oh, we can't waste this because it's so hard, and you start to see that sort of change in them to really appreciate what is being grown, and that this will then maybe enforce that and allow them to become more responsible consumers for the future, to question the food system, to want a more equitable food system for the future. So that evolution we are seeing slowly taking place, and it's a very important part of our work.
Are you planning to do something like this with SMU? We're like a big community with so many schools, and I'm sure a lot of us would be really interested to come and join this movement, learn more about how it is, and also bring in some change. Maybe we could have our little farm, like the SMU farm or something like that, maybe, for sure.
You actually have one. It's called SMU Grow, which we built many years back. Of course, what we talked about earlier is that that there's always an intention and of driving a certain movement, but sometimes when the lead person leave, it fizzles out a little bit. So I think this is with SMU is kind of fizzling. So it requires then a new group of people coming in to really push it up. Happy to support, yeah. But the infrastructure, or at least the understanding and knowledge is already sort of encapsulated in SMU. We just need to reignite that.
Okay, we are at time. So today, I just want to review. We examined the process of change making from three really unique and creative people doing very interesting things in different walks of life. And we looked at how do we create change together. In particular, we dwelled on some tough questions. How do you get others to visualize something new? How do you learn a problem together? How do you understand the opportunities and the obstacles together? And we heard some very exciting and interesting perspectives. You guys asked some very great questions. And so I want you to think about how can you bring together the very best parts of yourself. Maybe you're a musician, a lover of nature, with a flair for technology. If you were to bring these different parts of yourself together, what might be possible for you? And there's no wrong way to be a change maker. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to now proceed back to the main stage where we will be doing some closing reflections. Thank you.